Today is a first of a series of 4 videos that will focus on healing through relationships. So many of us see relationships as challenges that we have to work through and struggle through. We have to work at them, we so often say to ourselves. But I'd also encourage you to open up to the idea that relationships are actually a revelation, a chance to see what is inside ourselves that needs attention. And in truth, the moments that set us back in relationships are actually more about ourselves than about the other person, as hard as that might be to hear for some of you. But today, let's start with this whole idea of a trigger. I get triggered by this or that. It's something that we say often in our everyday language around relationships. And it can be viewed as some kind of a flaw, that I've been triggered here by something. But I would encourage you to actually see that it's an adaptive function. That another way of looking at it would be to say that you are remembering something, remembering a way of dealing with a situation or dealing with emotions, with relationships with people that you learned earlier in life. We're more prone to say things like, I'm too reactive, I'm too sensitive, I'm too this or that. And whilst there's truth to those descriptions, it doesn't necessarily help with the progress moving forward with that situation. If we see it as a flaw rather than what it is, which is really a protective function, that at some stages during your life, usually the formative years, first 7 years in particular, you learn to deal with the world in a certain way because it felt emotionally unsafe. And this is what your triggers are. You're remembering a way or an experience that or set of experiences that you had earlier in life. And that familiarity brings out a very similar type of response from you. Although it isn't a response, it is a reaction. Hence, if you take the word react and put a hyphen between the E and the A, reacting, you're simply repeating something that you learned at an earlier stage in your life. So rather than seeing this as such a flaw, it's probably more functional for us to look at it as just a shift in roles, that a protective aspect or part has stepped in and taken the steering wheel, rather than seeing it as I'm broken, I'm not functioning as humans should, because in reality that response, or that reaction I should say, protected you at some point. And I'd like to use the example of some of the people that I work with. I see day in, day out, the different patterns that my clients have felt the need to adapt to in order to survive their early life experiences, and then seek to understand why their current day relationships are the way they are. And the answers can generally be found in those early experiences once we go back and explore. Not always early childhood. Certainly the personality continues to evolve throughout your teen years and into your mid-20s even. It's suggested that neuroplasticity really slows down. But yeah, these early experiences tend to be when we're most vulnerable, for starters, and really need to develop a set of protective mechanisms, and that these protective mechanisms, because of the way that the brain develops, get really locked in these early stages and remain with us. So a trigger is simply one of these adaptive functions being brought back into action because it feels like there's a necessity to. There's some sense of emotional safety being threatened that activates this protective functioning to come into play. And so if I use an example with one pattern I see in my clients, and it is one of withdrawing or being passive. And quite often that pattern was formed when there was some kind of sense of powerlessness that happened early in life. Now, some of the clients I work with, it's quite easy to pin down that it was a parent that was very dominant. There wasn't any point arguing back with that particular parent, and learning to not rock the boat and stay quiet was the best course of action. Often it is also the case that the other parent was the passive one also, which is why certain marriages and relationship dynamics last as long as they do, because if you have one person becoming quite subdued and passive and allowing the other person to be the dominant leader in the relationship, then the relationship can function. Whereas if you have two people that are dominant, there's a lot more clashing and more likely that relationship will end. So yeah, there's a bit of both going on here. There's this protective mechanism against one parent, also having it reinforced by another parent by modeling the same kind of behavior, the same kind of passive behavior. In other cases, it's not as obvious as to where the protective reaction came from, and it can be a lot more subtle. For example, a parent who's more fragile with their emotions might have inadvertently encouraged the child to withdraw and pull back on their own emotions because that child, that individual, didn't want to trigger any more emotional reaction within that parent. So in some instances, it's more subtle, it's less obvious, but nevertheless, there's always a reason behind these types of behaviors, such as withdrawing, defending, people-pleasing, over-explaining, anger. There's a protective function to stop further wounding, to try and reduce the chances that that individual will have some kind of emotional wounding, such as feeling further powerlessness, feeling sad, feeling anxious, etc., etc. And so I invite you now to explore how this might have unfolded for you in a particular situation. Take a moment where you were not your preferred self. Bring that to mind. Something that happened perhaps recently, or maybe it's a pattern that reoccurs for you over and over again. And bring that to mind. Now you can keep your eyes open, or you can let them go shut if it helps to access that memory. And And just notice what it was that happened for you in that particular moment of acting out of alignment with who you prefer to be. Did you withdraw? Did you become defensive and angry? Did you try to placate the other person? Did you become sullen and sulky and internally resentful, but on the outside mask this from those around you? Simply notice what it was that you did, but then notice also that there's a familiarity in the way that you acted in that moment. See if you can go back as far as you can into your early life to find a very early example of this same reaction. What were you trying to protect yourself from? Maybe you were trying to protect yourself from feeling like you'd done the wrong thing. Maybe it was from one of your caregivers pulling away from you, judging you. Fear of disappointment. Sense that maybe the love that you were receiving was conditional in some kind of way, that you needed to do something in order to receive that love. And hence being the good boy or girl was necessary. And just let yourself feel understanding and compassion towards yourself for the fact that this pattern was necessary. There's nothing about you that's broken. It was purely an adaptive response to your circumstances. Just bring awareness to it. Simply bring awareness, and this is the start. The start of softening up this cycle that perhaps you've been in, where you've cursed this tendency, try to push it away after you've realized it's reared its head. But it's not your enemy. This reaction, this part of you, simply trying to keep you safe. And so honor it. Yes, it might need some help, this aspect of yourself, to get up to speed with where things are now, rather than running off the rules of the past. But nevertheless, show it the respect it deserves as an aspect trying to keep you safe, not harm you. And so, in closing, suggest or offer that a trigger is not an accusation, it's information. That a trigger is filled with information about how you've dealt with things in the past and where attention can be offered to help rebalance your current approach to your emotional safety. These aspects of yourself or parts of yourself are just simply caught in a loop, caught in a time warp, if you like. And when they are acknowledged and shown the gratitude that they deserve, these aspects can be brought up to date, up to speed with the current scenario, the current way you live your life, and allowed to function as the you are today. And also know that that core essence of you, that core self, never disappears. It's just that those parts take the steering wheel briefly. And that core essence of who you are is always waiting there patiently to resume that state of being, or to bring you back to that state of being. If you listen and just come back to presence, come back to the breath, come back to your heart, you can find your way back. And those triggers can be seen for what they are. Thank you.